At midnight, a woman walked into the most dangerous man's study in Chicago, not to beg, not to run, but to hand him proof that someone inside his own empire had stolen $12 million. She expected a conversation. What she got was a locked door, a crimson-lit mansion, and a voice through the intercom that said, "Someone here doesn't leave alive." The man she once loved turned the final deadbolt himself, not to keep her in, but to trap every enemy around her. This is the night the game changed, and nobody was ready for the woman who rewrote the rules. Stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The cab dropped her 2 blocks from the Calder estate because she wouldn't let it go further. Old habit. 8 years of old habits, actually. The kind that kept a person breathing when the city they grew up in wanted them dead. Mara Vane stood in the November dark with the leather satchel pressed against her ribs and watched her own breath dissolve into the wet Chicago air. The estate loomed at the end of Aldrich Lane, the way it always had. Iron fence, stone walls, no wasted light. Roman Calder did not believe in decorative things. Every choice that man made was load-bearing. She hated that she still thought about him that way. Precise. Deliberate. Like he built every room in his life to hold weight. She also hated that she'd flown 600 miles tonight without telling her brother, without calling ahead, without any kind of plan beyond get there before someone else did. The satchel held 3 months of forensic work. Transaction trails, shell accounts, wire transfers routed through 4 different countries before landing in a fund nobody was supposed to know existed. $12 million moved in pieces by someone who understood Roman's financial architecture from the inside. Someone who had been trusted. The gate guard clocked her before she reached the intercom. She saw him tense under his jacket, saw him recognize her, watched the moment stretch while he made a decision. His name was Brecht. He'd been with Roman since before Mara left. He was the kind of man who remembered everything and said almost nothing. "Miss Vane." "Brecht." "Mr. Calder isn't expecting company." "No." She kept her hands where he could see them. "He isn't." Brecht studied her face for a long 4 seconds, then stepped aside without another word. That told her something. Either he'd been ordered to let her through if she ever showed, or he'd made an independent call, and with a man like Brecht, there wasn't much difference. Both options meant Roman had thought about this moment, had anticipated it even if he hadn't summoned it. She walked the crushed gravel drive in the dark and thought about what that meant. The front entry was unlocked. That was wrong. Not alarming yet. She cataloged it as wrong and kept moving. The foyer smelled like bourbon and old wood and the particular stillness of a house where someone had recently argued and the walls hadn't let it go. She knew that smell. She'd grown up in houses that held arguments in their insulation. The study was at the end of the east corridor. Roman's study. She'd been in it exactly twice in her life, and both times she'd felt the specific unease of being somewhere that a person had shaped so completely around themselves that entering it felt like trespass. His desk was a slab of black walnut. His bookshelves held mostly ledgers and legal texts with broken spines. There were no paintings, no family photographs, just a single window that looked out over the backgrounds, and behind the desk, the man himself. Roman Calder was 44 years old and looked like someone had assembled him from materials that didn't apologize for what they were. Heavy jaw. Eyes the color of river water in February. Not blue, not gray. Something colder and less decided than either. He wore his shirt untucked at this hour, collar open, and he was reading something on paper rather than a screen, which was very him, and he set it down when she entered without showing the slightest surprise on his face. That was also very him. Mara. Not a question, not a greeting, really. Just acknowledgement, like someone noting weather. Roman. She moved to the desk. Didn't sit. She needed to be standing for this. Don't ask me how I got here. Don't ask me why I didn't call. I'm going to put this on your desk and you're going to look at it, and then we're going to talk. She opened the satchel and set the documents out. Transaction summaries, account trees, a timeline she'd built by hand because she didn't trust a single piece of software connected to a network anyone else could touch. 12 pages, 2 years of movement, one conclusion at the bottom of the last sheet, underlined twice. Roman didn't touch them immediately. He looked at her instead, the way he used to, like she was a problem he found interesting rather than inconvenient, and like he was still deciding which one she was this time. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired. I've been following money for 3 months." She pointed at the papers. "Someone in your organization has been bleeding the operation. 12 million over 22 months. Not all at once, not sloppily. Systematic. Whoever did this knows your structure. They know which accounts get reviewed and when. They moved funds during transitions, during the noise of bigger deals, every time attention was pointed somewhere else." He picked up the first page. His eyes moved. He read fast. She'd forgotten that. Or maybe she'd tried to forget it. How quickly that mind processed. How little expression crossed his face when it was working. "How certain are you?" "Completely." He set the page down, picked up the second. "You've been in Seattle, Portland, before that Denver. 8 years." He didn't say it with accusation, and that was somehow harder to absorb than if he had. "And you came back here tonight because whoever took this money left a trail that pointed towards someone else, and that someone else is my brother." She watched his jaw tighten exactly once, like a cable drawn taut. "The accounts are registered under shell companies. 2 of those shells share a legal address with a property Dorian uses for storage. That's not coincidence, and it's not Dorian, and I needed you to see the real trail before anyone handed you the fake one." Roman set down the second page. "Who else has seen this?" "No one. No one at all. I built it alone. Paper only. I didn't even use my own laptop." She was breathing harder than she wanted to be. "Dorian doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know I found any of this. I wasn't going to come back, Roman. You need to understand that. I was going to send it anonymously. But if I sent it anonymously, someone could intercept it, could alter it, could use it to... I had to bring it myself." He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, through the window, the grounds were dark and still. "I need water," she said, not because she particularly wanted it, but because she needed to break the weight of his silence before it settled on her like stone. "There's bourbon on the..." That was when the lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a power surge. A clean, total cut, the kind that didn't happen by accident in a building with 3 separate electrical redundancies. The darkness was absolute for approximately 2 seconds, and then the emergency lighting activated. And it was wrong. It was red. Not the pale amber of standard backup systems, but a deep, deliberate crimson that turned the study into something that felt like the inside of a wound. Mara didn't move. Roman didn't move. They'd both learned long ago that the first 3 seconds of a changed situation belonged to information, not action. The steel shutters came down in sequence. She heard them, a mechanical progression from the far end of the house toward them, heavy panels slamming against window frames. By the time the study window disappeared behind iron, every point of outside visibility in the building had been sealed. She knew this because she could no longer hear traffic, could no longer see the ambient glow of the city above the tree line. Completely sealed. Then the intercom clicked. It was mounted on the wall beside the door, a panel she'd never paid attention to, and the voice that came through it had been processed into something flat and unidentifiable. Neither male nor female, neither young nor old, just sound stripped of humanity. "Good evening, Mr. Calder. You have guests you weren't expecting. That's all right. So do we." Roman's hand moved to the desk drawer. It came back empty. Not nothing, she realized. The drawer was locked, and he hadn't been expecting to need what was inside it fast. That told her the lockdown had overridden something, possibly everything. "The estate is sealed, exits are secured. The following individuals are currently inside the building. Yourself, Ms. Vane, Mr. Dorian Vane, Commander Silas Crow, Ms. Celeste Marr, Mr. Nolan Say, and 6 of your field captains." A pause. Not for effect, for timing. This had been rehearsed. "Someone among them arranged the theft you've just been reading about. Before sunrise, you will identify them. Each incorrect accusation will cost you a territory and 1 person who trusts you. The game ends when the truth comes out or when there's no one left to protect. We'll be watching." The intercom went silent. The crimson light hummed. Roman stood perfectly still for 1 more second. Then he walked to the study door and pulled it open, stepped into the corridor, and checked the handle on the far end. She heard him try it, the solid, immovable resistance of a lock that wasn't a standard mechanism. Then his footsteps returned. He picked up his phone from the desk, looked at the screen, set it down. No signal. Jammer, Mara said. Yes. They've been inside the building. They've been inside the building for longer than tonight. He said it the way a person says something they'd been suspecting for weeks and had hoped not to confirm. He moved to the intercom panel, pressed the broadcast switch. You've forgotten something. He let the silence sit for just a moment. Then he reached into his jacket, not to the desk, to his jacket, and produced a key she hadn't seen before. Flat, old-fashioned, clearly manual. He crossed to the study door, inserted the key into a secondary lock she hadn't noticed in the doorframe, and turned it. Not out. In. He locked himself, locked them. Inside the study from the inside. Then he pressed the intercom button again, and his voice carried no anger, no urgency, nothing that could be used as information, just certainty. You wanted to play, Roman Calder said. Now we play by my rules. Mara stared at him. What did you just do? I locked every suspect inside the building with me. He set the key on the desk between her documents, and for the first time since she'd walked in, he let something cross his face that wasn't calculation. It wasn't warmth, exactly. It was recognition. The specific look of a man seen clearly after a long time of not allowing himself to. Including you. I'm not a suspect. No. He picked up her third document page without looking away from her. But whoever did this wanted you here, which means you being here is the only real piece of information we have that wasn't given to us on purpose. The weight of that settled on her slowly, the way cold comes through a wall. Not all at once, but until you realize it's been there for longer than you registered. Whoever had stolen $12 million hadn't only wanted the money. They'd wanted her in this building, tonight, with Roman, with her brother somewhere in these sealed corridors. Her throat tightened. Dorian, she said. He's here. Arrived 4 hours ago. Roman was already moving to the secondary panel she now noticed behind the bookshelf, a gray metal box she recognized as a localized security interface, the kind hardwired separate from the main system. He opened it with a second key from his jacket. He doesn't know you're in Chicago. Roman, she moved closer, kept her voice level by force. If someone staged the evidence to point at him, then someone wants me suspicious of him. Yes. He was scanning readouts on the panel, which is why the first thing I need to know is where he is in the building and whether he's armed. He looked at her sideways. And why the second thing I need is you. I'm not playing this game. You already are. He wasn't wrong, and he knew it, and she hated how much space in her chest that particular knowing took up. You're the only person in this building tonight who built the real financial trail. Every other piece of evidence in here was placed by someone who wants a specific outcome. You're the only counter to that. He looked at the panel readouts, and you know it, which is why you came. Mara stood in the crimson dark of the sealed study and looked at the document she'd spent 3 months building and thought about the 6 hours it had taken her to drive to the airport, buy a cash ticket, sit in the terminal at Portland pretending she was still deciding. She hadn't been deciding. She'd known since the moment she'd found the shell company address. She'd known the only move that protected Dorian was bringing the truth to the one man it could hurt if misused. Roman Calder, who had once been the thing she wanted most and the thing she ran from hardest. The panel, she said. What does it show? He glanced at her. Something in his posture shifted. Not relief, not victory. Resignation, maybe. The kind that comes from something going the way you feared but prepared for. Internal camera feeds are still live on the hardwired circuit. Sound is down, but movement is visible. He stepped back so she could see the grid of small screens. Dorian is in the north corridor. He's moving. Silas Crow is in the security hub near the back stairwell. The others, he paused, and the pause had weight. Nolan Say is in the kitchen. He's been there since the lockdown began. He's not trying the doors. He's not looking for exits. Mara looked at the screen. Nolan Say, Roman's operations chief, polished and calm in a darkened kitchen, sitting at a counter with his arms folded. Not panicked, not searching, waiting. She didn't say what she thought, not yet. She filed it, the way she filed everything, the way she'd trained herself to hold information until she had enough of it to build something true. But her body registered it before her mind finished processing. The cold move of certainty in her chest, the stillness that comes before the understanding lands. In the north corridor on the grainy, hardwired screen, Dorian Vane reached a sealed door and shook the handle hard enough to rattle the frame. She watched her brother the way she always had. Half love, half fear of what that love had always cost her. He turned and looked directly at a camera, like he somehow knew she was watching, and she put her hand flat against the cold glass of the monitor and couldn't decide whether what she felt was relief or dread. Probably both. Probably always both. He's going to find his way here, she said. Yes. And when he gets here and finds me, he's going to think that you came back because of me. Roman's voice was flat, which is what someone in this building wants both of us to believe. She turned. He was watching her with those February river eyes, and she thought, not for the first time, not without cost, that he was the most difficult kind of dangerous, not violent by default. Dangerous because he was patient, because he could hold two contradictory things in his head and function clearly between them, because he had looked at her 3 times tonight already, and each time she'd felt assessed and seen simultaneously, which were not the same thing and should not have both been tolerable. Roman. She kept it quiet, kept it controlled. If we're going to get through this building alive, I need you to promise me something. Tell me what it is first. You don't make any moves with Dorian based on the planted evidence. Whatever you see tonight, whatever anyone tells you, you come to me before you act on anything that touches him. He held still for a beat that was 1 beat too long. Roman, I need the same from you, he said. Whatever you find tonight, whatever the evidence shows about my people, about this organization, you bring it to me before you decide what it means. You want me to trust you. I want you to accept that we're the only 2 people in this building who can see the full picture, and that whoever locked these doors is counting on us not to look at it together. The intercom clicked again. Brief, not the voice, just a tone. A clock beginning. Something counting down in the walls of the sealed estate. And Mara Vane, who had spent 8 years building a life that didn't require this city, or this man, or the particular exhaustion of loving people who lived inside danger, like it was weather, picked up the key Roman had left on the desk. She turned it over in her fingers once. Then she looked up at him. My brother, she said. First. Roman nodded once, moved to unlock the study door. And as he did, she heard Dorian's voice somewhere in the corridor outside. Her brother's voice, tight with something she recognized from childhood as the moment before he did something that could not be taken back, and the sound hit her like a weight in the sternum. The door swung open into crimson dark, and somewhere in the walls the countdown kept running. Dorian Vane hit the corridor at a dead run the moment the study door swung open, and he pulled up short when he saw his sister standing in the crimson light with Roman Calder 2 feet behind her and a leather satchel over her shoulder, and the look on his face cycled through 4 different things in under a second. Relief, disbelief, fury, and something underneath all of it that was so close to grief it made Mara's chest ache. Then his jaw set. What the hell are you doing here? Not a question. Dorian Vane didn't ask questions when he already knew the shape of the answer and hated it. Dorian. 8 years. He stepped forward. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe she'd just let herself forget how much space her brother took up when he was angry. 6'2", broad through the shoulders, a scar along his left jaw from something that had happened 2 years after she'd left, and that she'd only heard about secondhand. 8 years, Mara. You don't call. You don't come back for any of it. Not once, not when I asked, not when I told you it was safe. And tonight you're here, in his house. He looked past her at Roman, and the temperature of his eyes dropped below anything reasonable. You called her. No. Roman's voice was steady, not defensive. Roman Calder didn't do defensive. It was the specific steadiness of a man who had already decided what he would and wouldn't justify. She came on her own. Right. Dorian. Mara moved between them, which was an old reflex and a stupid one, but the body remembered what the mind tried to unlearn. I came because I found something. I'll explain all of it, but right now I need you to listen to me for 60 seconds without making it about him. It's always about him with you. That's been the problem since someone locked us in. She said it flat and direct, cutting across the rising tide of whatever 8-year-old wound was about to spill out of him. The estate is sealed. Steel shutters, jammed exits, no signal. Someone took control of the security system tonight, and there's a voice on the intercom running what it called a game. We need to move and we need to think, and I need you not to be angry at me for the next few hours, Dorian. Can you do that? He breathed through his nose, looked at Roman again, looked back at her. Are you hurt? No. Are you... He stopped, reset. His hand came up and gripped her shoulder once, hard, the way he used to when they were kids, and something had scared him badly enough that he had to make sure she was physically present. Then he let go. Okay, he exhaled. Okay, tell me what you found. She told him. The corridor was cold and crimson, and she talked fast, watching his face while she laid out the transaction trail, the shell companies, the 22 months of systematic bleeding, the false address connection. She watched him work through it. Dorian was not a subtle man, but he was not a stupid one either, and she saw the moment he understood that someone had used his name, his property, his shadow, as a frame. His face went very still. Who else in the building knows about the financial connection? He said. Whoever planted it, Roman said from behind her. Dorian's eyes went back to Roman. Something passed between them that Mara couldn't fully read. A decade of partnership compressed into a look, all the weight of it, and underneath that weight, a new fracture that hadn't been there before. She could see it forming in real time, the way ice cracks. You saw the account, Dorian said. I saw it tonight from Mara for the first time. And you believe that framing isn't real. I believe Mara built the actual trail and it leads somewhere else. But you looked at the address, my address. And what was your first thought, Roman? Not your second thought, not what you decided after you analyzed it. What was the first thing that moved through your head when you saw my name on that page? Roman didn't answer immediately, and that pause told Dorian everything. Mara watched her brother's face close like a door, watched him step back one full step, a physical withdrawal that meant something. That's what I thought, Dorian said. Dorian? No, it's fine. It's useful, actually. He looked at Mara. Now I know where we stand. Now I know that 12 years of watching each other's backs means that when someone puts my name on a piece of paper, the first thing he... Stop. Roman's voice didn't rise. It just arrived, solid as a load-bearing wall, and something about it cut through the heat. The first thought I had is what any rational person would have had seeing evidence against someone they trust. The second thought, the one that actually determines how I act, was that it was planted. I've been operating on the second thought since the moment Mara walked in. You want to be angry at whoever built the frame, not at me for having a human reaction to it. The corridor breathed. The crimson light hummed. Dorian looked at him for a long 3 seconds. Then he turned away, which was not agreement and not forgiveness, but was at least a postponement of the war, and Mara let herself exhale. Nolan Say is in the kitchen, she said. He was sitting still when the lockdown started, not trying exits, not looking panicked, waiting. That shifted something in Dorian's posture. Nolan's been acting off for weeks, small things, timing of reports, a couple of decisions that cost us more than they should have. You didn't say anything, Roman said. I said it to you 2 weeks ago. You said you'd look into it. A beat. Did you? Roman's silence was a different kind of answer. Not evasive, weary. The weariness of a man who'd been carrying too many threads. I had 3 other active situations. Nolan was one of them. He should have been the first one. Dorian's voice was quieter now, which was somehow worse than when it was loud. I told you he was pulling decisions sideways, that he'd been late on 2 transfers that should have been clean. You said it was stress. I said it was possible stress. You trusted him. I trusted you both. Mara looked between them and thought, this is the fracture. This is what the game was built to crack open. Not a single accusation, not a dramatic confrontation. A series of small accumulated grievances, the kind that needed only one bad night to become irreparable. Whoever had designed this evening had understood something specific about the relationship between these 2 men. That it was built on trust, and that trust, in this world, always had a foundation of controlled doubt, and that if you applied enough pressure to the right point, one would collapse into the other. "We need Silas," she said. Both men looked at her. Silas Crow. He was in the security hub on the hardwired cameras. He knows this building's systems better than anyone. If there's a way to get partial communication out or to access the override. Silas is also a possible suspect, Roman said. Everyone in this building is a possible suspect. That doesn't mean we don't move. She picked up her satchel. The evidence points away from Dorian, which means the real trail points towards someone. Nolan is behaving wrong. That's data. Silas has system access. That's a resource. We don't sit in a corridor while someone runs a clock on us. She looked at Roman. Where's the security hub from here? He held her gaze for a moment, and she thought, not for the first time in the last 30 minutes, that he was doing that thing he always did, assessing how much she'd changed and whether what he found still lined up with whatever version of her he'd maintained in his head for 8 years. She didn't know what conclusion he reached. She never had. Back stairwell, he said. 2 corridors east. Then we go east. She moved first. She heard both of them fall in behind her, 3 feet of charged silence between them, and thought, good enough. Good enough for now. The east corridor was darker than the study wing. Fewer hardwired emergency fixtures, longer stretches between the dim red wall panels. The carpet absorbed footsteps. The house had always been good at that, she remembered. The Calder estate swallowed sound the way it swallowed everything. Quietly, completely, without apology. They were 20 feet from the stairwell entrance when the corridor sealed. Not gradually. A steel panel dropped from the ceiling with a mechanical bang that hit the floor and sent a shudder through the walls, and Mara stopped so fast that Dorian nearly walked into her back. The panel sat across the hall in front of them, flush with both walls, no seam, no gap at the bottom. Behind them, she heard a second panel. She spun, and it was down, sealing the way they'd come. She looked up. The ceiling was solid. She looked at the walls. Dorian had his weapon out. She hadn't even seen him draw it. Gas, Roman said. She smelled it a half second after he said it. Not heavy, not immediately choking, but present. Something designed to disorient before it incapacitated. Roman was already on his knees at the base of the wall on the right side, pressing along the baseboard with both palms. Service access. Every sealed corridor has one. It should be... His fingers found something. A panel, recessed, barely visible under the carpet edge. He pulled. It resisted. He pulled harder, and it came free in a rectangular section, revealing a low duct passage, dark, roughly 18 inches high. Go, he said to Mara. Together, she said, and didn't wait for his agreement. She went in first because she was already closest, pulling the satchel off her shoulder and pushing it ahead of her. The duct was cold and smelled like dust and something mechanical, old grease, old air. She moved fast, on elbows and knees, the crimson light from the corridor fading behind her into complete darkness. She heard Dorian behind her, heard Roman last. The gas smell didn't follow. The duct had its own air circuit. She focused on the darkness ahead, on the sound of her own breathing, on the specific task of getting to the end of the passage without stopping to think about how enclosed it was. How completely the walls fit around her body, how the sound of the panels dropping had removed every option but forward. She'd spent 8 years making sure she always had exits. She'd arranged her entire adult life around the existence of doors she could use, and now she was crawling through 18 inches of darkness in a sealed house, and the only way out was through. The duct ended in another access panel. She pushed it, and it opened into a utility room. Breakers, pipes, the mechanical infrastructure of a large house condensed into a space smelling of iron and old insulation. A single hardwired red fixture on the ceiling. She stood, checked the room, and turned to help Dorian through the opening. He came out looking like a man who had processed exactly as much anger as the situation allowed and was holding the rest in reserve. He straightened, looked at the room, said nothing. Roman came through last. He was carrying something from the duct, a length of wire, standard electrical, pulled free during the crawl. Old habit. He coiled it around his fist and pocketed it without explanation, and Mara didn't ask because she knew. Roman Calder picked up things that could be used. Always had. Where are we relative to the security hub? She said. Above it, Roman said. 1 level up. There's a maintenance hatch in the floor of the utility room. He was already scanning, found the hatch, lifted it, concrete stairs steep, descending into more red-tinged dark. Silas should be directly below. Dorian went first this time. She let him. He needed the motion, needed the direction, needed something to do with the energy that had been building since the moment he'd found her in the corridor. She followed, and Roman came last and pulled the hatch closed above them. Silas Crow was not in the security hub. The room was a compact space packed with monitors, a standing console, a manual override panel, and a chair that had been recently occupied. The residual warmth of it, the way the cushion held the impression of weight. The monitors still ran on the hardwired circuit, 12 screens showing static sections of the estate, corridors, the kitchen, the main foyer, the east wing. Mara's eyes went to the kitchen screen. Nolan was gone. "He moved," Dorian said. "When?" Roman was at the console, checking timestamps on the monitor feeds. "It doesn't show timestamps. These are live only." Mara scanned the other screens. Celeste Marr appeared on one. The small administrative office off the main gallery, sitting at a desk with her hands flat on the surface, not moving, like someone trying to be invisible. The captain showed up across 3 screens in clusters of 2, the East Hall, the wine cellar access point, 1 pair near the front foyer. Nobody was working together. Everyone was isolated. Silas Crow was on none of the screens. "He's not in the building," she said. "He's in the building," Roman said. "There are areas without coverage." "How many?" 3 dead zones, the basement armory, the east library, the kitchen passage between the service stairs. He was calm about it, which she recognized as a different thing from unbothered. Roman was almost always calm. It was what he did with the calm that mattered. Right now he was thinking fast and letting his body stay still while he did it, which meant he was more worried than he was showing. Dorian sat down at the console chair. "Silas wouldn't bolt. That's not him." "You said that about Nolan 2 years ago," Roman said. The silence that followed that sentence was very specific. It was the silence of something that should have been said differently, but had been said exactly as it was, and now it was in the room. Dorian turned the chair slowly. "Say that again." "I'm not repeating it. I'm saying that we can't make certainty-based decisions about anyone tonight based on how they've behaved historically. That's the environment that was built around us. Silas has been with you for 14 years. Nolan has been with me for 11. Dorian stood up. He was a few inches taller than Roman, and he used the height now, not aggressively, but the way a man uses his size when words aren't quite landing with the weight he needs. There is a difference between questioning and condemning, and if you can't hold that line tonight, then every person in this building who's actually loyal to you is going to end up on the wrong side of one of your decisions. I know the difference. Do you? Because the way you're talking about Silas right now sounds exactly like the way you talked about the Farron brothers before you. That situation was different. You were wrong. I know I was wrong. Roman said it without flinching, without the slightest move to protect himself from it, and somehow that was the most dangerous thing he could have said, because it left Dorian nowhere to push. I know I was wrong about the Farrons. I have known that for 3 years, and it has changed how I make these calls. But being wrong once does not mean I am wrong about Nolan, and it does not mean I am wrong to be uncertain about Silas until we find him. Dorian looked at him. The 3 years of unspoken something behind that exchange sat in the room like a fourth person. Mara decided to step around it. Celeste Marr, she said. Both men looked at her. She's in the administrative office. She hasn't moved since the lockdown. She's not trying to leave, not trying to communicate, not doing anything that a guilty person or a frightened person would do. She's just sitting. She pulled her documents from the satchel and laid the 6th page on the console. The shell companies that moved the 12 million, 3 of them have a registered fixer agent. The name is obscured behind 2 layers of legal structure, but the legal address is a firm that Celeste has used for Roman's property contracts for 6 years. The room got very quiet. That doesn't mean she set them up, Roman said. No, but it means she had access to the infrastructure. It means whoever built the shell companies knew which legal addresses would pass a first-level audit because they were already in Roman's legitimate transaction history. She tapped the page. Either Celeste is the architect or Celeste was used. And those are very different problems. We need to talk to her, Dorian said. We need to find Silas first, Roman said. We can split. No. Roman's voice landed hard enough to stop Dorian mid-sentence. Nobody splits. That's exactly what the game is designed to make us do. Separate us, give each fragment incomplete information, let us come to different conclusions, and then the intercom in the security hub clicked to life. The same flat, processed voice. 40 minutes have passed. No accusation has been made. The cost of inaction is the same as the cost of a wrong answer. A pause. Mr. Dorian Vane, we have something you should see. There is a recording in the East Library. It was made 14 months ago. It concerns a conversation between your sister and Roman Calder that you were not informed of. Another pause, almost thoughtful. Room 114, East Corridor, past the sealed section. There is an access path you know about, Mr. Vane. We suggest you find it. The intercom went silent. Dorian did not move for 2 full seconds. Then he turned and looked at Roman with an expression that had passed through anger and come out the other side into something colder and far more frightening, because fury is a temperature. But the thing that follows fury when a man has had enough is not. The thing that follows is a decision. What recording? Dorian said. What recording, Roman? There were conversations between Mara and me before she left Chicago. Roman kept his voice even. After you told her to leave. Mara felt every muscle in her body go rigid. Dorian's eyes moved to her. She watched him reassemble a sequence of events he thought he'd understood for 8 years and find that the shape of them had been different than he'd thought. She watched him understand that there was something she hadn't told him. And she watched the alliance that had always existed between brother and sister. The alliance she had counted on tonight, the one she'd built her entire plan around, begin to fissure under the specific weight of discovering that she had kept something from him while asking him to trust her. Mara. His voice was very quiet. What conversations? Dorian, this is exactly what What? Conversations. She looked at him and thought about the 14 months before she'd left, about the weeks when she had been deciding whether to stay or whether to go, about the specific night she had sat across from Roman Calder and told him what she felt and what she feared, and about the answer he had given her that she had carried for 8 years without putting it down because she hadn't known how. Nothing happened, she said. That's not the same as nothing existed, Dorian said. Dorian, he was already moving toward the door. Don't go to that room alone, Roman said. Don't tell me what to do in your house. Dorian hit the door handle, looked back over his shoulder, not at Roman, at Mara, and the look had something in it she hadn't seen from him since they were children. The specific devastation of someone who has just discovered that the one person they were certain of had been less than completely certain of them. When this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about what it means to ask for someone's trust. He left. The door closed. The security hub held only Roman and Mara and the hum of hardwired monitors and the weight of what had just walked out of the room. She wanted to go after him. Every instinct she had that was built from 20 years of being Dorian Vane's sister told her to go after him. But Roman was already at the door and he turned and met her eyes. And what passed between them in that look was not warmth, and it was not strategy, and it was not history, though all three were present. It was something more specific. It was the shared knowledge that whoever had made that intercom call had just accomplished exactly what they'd wanted. They had sent Dorian Vane alone toward a room containing a recording designed to break whatever trust remained between him and the 2 people in this building who needed him steady. The East Library, she said. He'll get there before us. I know. She picked up her satchel. Her hands were steady. She made them be steady. Then we run. They ran. And 3 corridors away, in the sealed dark of a kitchen passage, nobody was watching. Nolan Say checked his watch, confirmed the timing, and allowed himself a small, precise smile that nobody in this building was positioned to see, because the first piece had just moved exactly where he'd needed it to go. And the second piece, the one that would end this cleanly, that would collapse the Vane-Calder alliance so completely that no version of Roman's empire survived the morning, was already in motion, Waiting in a room Dorian Vane was walking toward alone, without backup, with 8 years of unanswered questions burning in his chest and a gun in his hand, and the specific vulnerability of a man who has just been told that the people he loves most have been keeping secrets in the dark. They ran. Not the clean sprint of people who had a plan, the hard, graceless run of two people who knew they were already behind and were burning the distance between themselves and the consequences anyway. Mara's shoes were wrong for it, low heels on marble, and she shed them at the first corner without breaking stride, cold floor through her stockings. Fine. She'd been uncomfortable before. She'd been a lot of things before. Roman ran like a man who never let his body show urgency, but had quietly given it permission tonight. Long strides, economical, no wasted motion. He knew the house. She watched him navigate 2 corridor intersections in the dark without hesitation. One right turn followed by a left that bypassed the sealed east section entirely, routing through the service passage behind the main gallery. She followed his line exactly and didn't ask questions because there was no breath for questions. The East Library was at the far end of the building's original wing, a room Roman used for what Dorian had once called the paperwork nobody wanted to see. Contracts, historical records, the accumulated documentation of an empire that had been running for 30 years. Double doors, heavy wood, brass handles. Both doors were slightly open when they arrived. That was wrong. Roman put his hand up, and she stopped. They stood in the corridor outside and listened. Voices. 2 of them, both male. One was Dorian. The other was lower, quieter, harder to place, and it took Mara 4 full seconds of cold-blooded stillness to identify it. Silas Crow. She and Roman exchanged a look in the dark. His jaw was tight. He moved to the door edge and she moved to the other side, and they listened to what was happening inside. Dorian's voice was controlled the way a man's voice is controlled when he is working very hard to keep himself from doing something permanent. Play it again. A sound. Digital, a recording being rewound. Then voices from a speaker. She recognized the audio quality immediately. Internal surveillance, the estate's own system, not cleaned up or enhanced. 2 voices, Roman's and hers. Her stomach dropped through the floor. She knew the night. She knew it the instant she heard the first sentence, because there was only one conversation she and Roman had ever had that Dorian could not know about. Only one exchange that sat at the exact center of every decision she had made in the 8 years since. She had been in this library 14 months before she left Chicago. Roman had found her here after midnight with a bottle of whiskey she wasn't finishing, and the specific kind of despair that comes from knowing exactly what you want and exactly why you can't have it. On the recording, her voice said, "If I stay, Dorian loses you. If I leave, I lose both of you. That's not a choice, Roman. That's a trap." And Roman's voice, younger or maybe just less careful, the same voice but without the 8 years of practice at carrying things without showing it, said, "Then don't let it be a trap. Stay. We figure out Dorian together." And her voice quieter. "He told me if we pursued this, it would fracture the alliance." His words, fracture. He meant it. And Roman, "I know what he meant." A silence on the recording. Then, "I know what he meant, and I'm telling you that I disagree with him. That's all I'm saying. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm telling you there's another option." And then her voice, barely audible, even on the recording. "There isn't, Roman. There never was." The recording stopped. The library was very quiet. Dorian's voice came out flat as poured concrete. "He asked you to stay." Mara pushed the door open and walked in. Dorian stood with his back to one of the reading tables, arms crossed, a portable player on the surface behind him. Silas Crow stood near the far bookshelf, hands visible, expression unreadable in the crimson half-light. He was a lean man, Silas, 60 years old and built like a telegraph wire. Everything unnecessary removed, everything that remained under tension. His eyes went to Roman when Roman entered behind Mara, and something moved in them that she couldn't categorize fast enough. "He asked you to stay," Dorian said again, looking at her. Not at Roman. At her. "Yes," she said, "and you didn't tell me." "No." "For 8 years. He uncrossed his arms, set his hands flat on the table behind him. She recognized that. He'd done it since they were teenagers, hands flat on a surface when he needed to keep them from doing something else. You let me believe you left because of the situation, because of the risk to the organization, the risk to the alliance. You let me believe that Roman, he stopped, started again. You let me spend 8 years thinking you left because there was no other option, when he gave you one. Dorian, did you love him? The room absorbed that question. Roman stood very still just inside the door. Silas looked at the floor with the specific studiousness of a man trying to be somewhere else. Mara looked at her brother and said, "Yes." The word landed. Dorian pushed off the table, not toward her. Sideways, a restless move, a man trying to walk off the edges of something too large for the room. And you chose to leave anyway, without telling me any of this. You got on a plane and you let me think it was... He laughed, and it was the worst kind of laugh. The kind that has nothing to do with anything funny. You spent 8 years in other cities being the responsible one, the one who sacrificed, the one who gave things up for the good of the family. And the whole time you were protecting something you never told me existed. I was protecting you from a choice you shouldn't have had to make, she said. That was my choice to make. You would have told him to leave, Dorian. You'd already told me to leave. I would have figured it out. His voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. I would have found a way. You didn't give me the chance because you decided for me the way you've always decided for me, the way everybody in my life decides what I can handle without asking. He looked at Roman. And you. You asked her to stay and then you let her go. You watched her walk out and you never said a word to me. 14 months you sat on this and you ran the operation with me for 14 months and you never... I made a promise, Roman said. To her. Yes. Over me. She asked me not to tell you. I honored that. He moved further into the room, slow, deliberate. I disagreed with her choice to leave. I did not override it. That is the difference between respecting someone and using them. Dorian stared at him. The old fracture from the corridor had widened into something structural now, something that was going to determine whether the floor held. Mara looked at Silas. Why are you here? He raised his eyes. I found the recording 2 hours ago, before the lockdown. I was reviewing archived surveillance from the last 18 months, looking for security gaps after the financial irregularities were flagged internally. I found the conversation. He paused. I didn't know what to do with it. I was looking for Mr. Vaughn to discuss it privately when the shutters came down. And you chose to show it to Dorian, Roman said. He found me. Silas's voice was careful, steady. He found me in the East Passage 40 minutes ago. He asked what I was doing in this wing, and He stopped. I made a judgment call. I thought he had a right to know. A judgment call, Mara said slowly. Yes, ma'am. She studied him. 14 years with Roman, Silas Crow, long enough to know every protocol, every priority, every principle of information management that the organization ran on. Long enough to know that surfacing a personal recording of this nature without Roman's approval, especially on a night when the estate was locked down and active, was not a judgment call. It was a choice, one with a direction. Silas, she said, who told you to review the 18-month archive? He met her eyes. Nobody. It was routine security. What was the trigger event for the review? A beat. Half a beat. An internal flag. Who generated the flag? Another pause, this one long enough to be its own answer. Nolan, Roman said. Very quiet. Silas didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. He stood with his hands visible and his expression doing the careful nothing of a man who had realized, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that the path he'd been guided down had an edge he hadn't seen until right now. Roman crossed the room in 6 strides. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stopped 2 feet from Silas, and the room temperature did something that had nothing to do with the building's climate systems. How long? Roman, I'm not asking again. Silas Crow, who had worked for Roman Calder for 14 years, who had overseen security for an organization that moved through Chicago like water through stone, who had been trusted with codes and contingencies, and the kind of access that constituted a complete map of every vulnerability the estate contained, Silas Crow closed his eyes for 2 seconds and then opened them and said, 3 months. The word was a trap door. Dorian stopped moving. Mara felt the cold move through her in a single wave, head to floor. He came to me in August, Silas said, and now that he'd started, there was a quality to his voice of something that had been under enormous pressure releasing. Not relief, not confession, just the specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has run out of reasons to keep holding it. He told me he had evidence that Roman was planning to dissolve the Vane partnership, that he was going to take sole control of the Chicago territories and cut Dorian out. He showed me documents, financial projections, restructuring plans. They looked legitimate. I've seen Roman's work product for 14 years. They were consistent with his methodology. They were fabricated, Roman said. I know that now. What did he ask you to do? Silas looked at the floor. Small things at first, timing of reports, security rotation adjustments that created coverage gaps on specific dates, log access to certain archived files. He looked up. Tonight he told me to find the recording and make sure Dorian saw it. He said it was the last piece, that after tonight, he would have what he needed to restructure the organization under new leadership and that everyone who had cooperated would be protected. The library held all of that. Then Dorian said, "There is no restructuring. He just wants us to tear each other apart so there's nothing left to restructure." Silas nodded once, the nod of a man who has arrived at an understanding too late to change the cost of it. Roman looked at him for a long moment. Something worked in his jaw. Then he stepped back, one deliberate step, and looked at Mara. She could see him processing, not the betrayal. He would process the betrayal later, in private, in whatever space he allowed himself to be human. He was processing what Silas's cooperation meant in practical terms, what Nolan now had that he hadn't had before. The coverage gaps, she said, the rotation adjustments, what did they give him access to? Silas hesitated. Silas, her voice was flat. We don't have time for shame right now. What did the gaps give him? The basement armory. He said it like a man pulling a splinter. And the foundation access points. There are service tunnels beneath the estate, for utilities, originally. They run under the main structure. He paused. Nolan asked me for the schematics 3 weeks ago. I told him it was for emergency protocol review. The cold that moved through Mara this time was different from the first one. The first had been shock. This one was understanding, and understanding was worse because it had architecture. She turned to Roman. She watched the same understanding arrive on his face in real time, watched him assemble it the way she had. The 12 million as bait, her return as the trigger, the recording as the wedge between her and Dorian, and underneath all of it, beneath the literal floor of the estate where they were all standing. He's been in the tunnels, Roman said. Yes, Silas said, almost inaudible. How long does it take to place? I don't know, I didn't know it was for... Silas stopped, pressed his hand against the bookshelf. I didn't know what the schematics were for. I should have known. I should have... The intercom in the East Library clicked. Mr. Say would like to congratulate you on reaching this point. The flat processed voice, unchanged, unhurried. Most people don't get this far before the pieces stop being relevant. The foundation access has been secured. The exit connections have been modified. Every door in this estate is now connected to a single detonation system. You will not force the exits. You will not cut the power because the power is already on backup, and the backup is what runs the trigger circuit. The only override requires 2 codes, one of which Mr. Say holds, and one of which is embedded in the financial archive that Ms. Vane was kind enough to bring to Chicago tonight. A pause. Mr. Vane, your sister's archive contains the code that could let everyone in this building walk out alive. All Mr. Say requires is the drive. He is in the council chamber. He is waiting. You have 20 minutes before the backup circuit switches to the autonomous sequence, at which point the code becomes irrelevant. The intercom clicked off. The library held 4 people in absolute silence. Mara looked down at the satchel on her shoulder. The drive was inside it. 3 months of work, The real financial trail, the evidence that cleared Dorian and pointed toward Nolan and could bring down the entire financial infrastructure of his operation. It was also, apparently, the only key that unlocked a detonation system sitting beneath everyone's feet. Dorian looked at the satchel, then at her. Give him the drive. If I give him the drive, he destroys the evidence, walks out with Roman's territories mapped and seized, and the financial crimes disappear. Everything he's built disappears. She kept her voice steady, forced it to be. Dorian, I don't care about the evidence. I care about you getting out of this building. The drive is the only leverage we have. The drive is the thing that gets you killed if you don't hand it over. Mara. He stepped toward her. The 8-year rupture, the recording, the 14 months of withheld truth. He set all of it aside with a physical deliberateness she recognized from their childhood, the way Dorian had always been able to table his own wounds when the threat was immediate. It was his best quality and the one that had cost him the most. Give him the drive. We find another way to take Nolan down. There is no other way. The archive is the only complete record. Destroy it, and he walks clean. Then he walks clean. I'd rather he walk clean than what? She heard her voice go sharp in a way she hadn't intended. Then let me make a decision for myself? You just finished telling me that everyone decides for you without asking. Now you're doing the same thing. Dorian stopped. She watched it land, watched him absorb the accuracy of it with the specific expression of someone recognizing their own pattern in real time. The council chamber, Roman said. He was looking at the door. Nolan chose it deliberately. It's the only room in the estate with reinforced glass on 3 sides. He can see every approach. He can see into the corridor and the gallery above and the hall below. He turned. He's positioned himself so he can watch us come. Whatever we do, he sees it first. Then we don't let him see it first, Mara said. How? She was thinking. She could feel the thought forming. Not complete yet, just the outline of something. The structural shape of an idea, the way she could see the shape of a financial scheme before she could see the details. Give him what he expects to see. Give him the scene that makes sense. And underneath that scene, do something he isn't watching for. The archive, she said. He needs the archive specifically because the code is embedded in it. But he doesn't know the architecture of the files. He doesn't know how I built it. Roman looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying he asked for a drive. He didn't ask for a specific drive. She reached into the satchel, not for the archive drive, for the secondary storage she always carried, an old habit from her forensic work, a blank drive she used for transfers. I'm saying that what I give him and what he thinks I give him don't have to be the same thing. He'll check it, Silas said. Yes, and while he's checking it, I need the real code. She looked at the archive drive in her hand. The code is in the archive, but I built the archive. I know where it is. I need 5 minutes with a working terminal to extract it before we go to that chamber. The security hub terminal is hardwired, Roman said. Then we need to get back to the security hub. There's no clear path. The gas corridor, the ventilation ducts, Dorian said. They all looked at him. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has been in this building many times and has paid attention to things other people didn't. The estate's original ventilation runs from the east wing straight through to the central hub. You came through a maintenance duct earlier. There's a larger shaft behind the library's north wall. It connects directly. He looked at Roman. You know it. Roman looked at him for a moment that held everything. The recording, the 14 months, the 14 years, the crack in the foundation of something that had been built to last and had held through worse than most structures survived. And in that moment, Mara watched Roman Calder make a choice that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the specific cost of trust, which is that you pay it in advance with no guarantee of return. I know it, Roman said. Then show her, Dorian said. I'll go to the council chamber. I'll tell Nolan we're coming. I'll stall him. Absolutely not, Mara said. He needs to see movement. He needs to believe the plan is proceeding the way he designed it. If 20 minutes pass and nobody shows up, he moves to the autonomous sequence and none of this matters. Dorian looked at her with the particular steadiness of a man who has decided something and has made peace with the cost of it. I can stall him. I've been dealing with Nolan Say for 11 years. I know how he talks. I know what he needs to hear. He has a weapon, Dorian. So do I. That's not Mara. He said her name with the weight of everything they'd said in this room and everything they hadn't. Let me make a decision for myself. She looked at him. He looked back. The 8 years sat between them, and also around them. And also, she realized, behind them now. Not gone, not resolved, but repositioned. Something that had been in front of her for 8 years was now at her back, and the thing in front of her was a council chamber with reinforced glass and a man who had spent 3 years building toward this night. She said, "If he raises the weapon, I know. Dorian, I know, Mara." He looked at her once more with the look that had no name for it except brother, the irreducible specific frequency of someone who has known you from the beginning, who holds the original version of you and keeps it even when the current version has sharp edges and bad habits and 8 years of mistakes between you. Go get the code. He walked out. Roman moved to the north wall of the library and pressed along the wainscoting until a section shifted. Behind it, a shaft, larger than the maintenance duct, traversable at a crouch. He looked at her. She was already moving. And in the council chamber at the center of the Calder estate, behind 3 walls of reinforced glass in the crimson dark, Nolan Say sat in Roman's chair at Roman's table and checked his watch and thought about how clean this was going to be. He'd spent 3 years building toward this. 3 years of patience, of small moves and careful removals and planted evidence and cultivated doubt. He had always known the hardest part was not destroying the Empire. Any sufficient force could do that. The hardest part was making the Empire destroy itself. And it was working. He could feel it working the way you feel a structure failing. The specific, satisfying sequence of the load transferring, the weight shifting, everything moving toward inevitable collapse. The door to the council chamber opened. Nolan looked up. Dorian Vane walked in alone, hands visible, jaw set, with the expression of a man who has decided to negotiate and hates himself for it, and Nolan Say, who had spent 3 years reading every person in this building, saw exactly what he expected to see, and that was the first mistake he made. Because Dorian Vane's expression was not negotiation at all, and the thing a man sees when he looks for what he expects is only ever what he's already decided is there, and Nolan Say had already decided he had won, and that decision was the crack in his foundation that none of his planning had accounted for, because you cannot build something airtight out of certainty, and certainty is always, always the last thing to fail. The ventilation shaft was cold enough to hurt. Mara moved through it on elbows and knees with the archive drive pressed flat against her sternum inside her jacket, and the only light was the residual crimson bleed from the vent slats they passed over. And the only sound was her breathing and Roman's breathing 4 feet behind her, and the distant mechanical hum of a building that had been sealed against itself. The shaft was original construction, 1940s steel, riveted seams, the kind of infrastructure that got built when buildings were expected to last rather than be replaced. It was also narrow enough that her shoulders brushed both walls simultaneously when she tensed, which she was doing constantly, which she needed to stop doing because tense shoulders and an 18-inch shaft were a liability. She focused on the drive against her chest, on the code inside it, on the 5 minutes she needed at the hardwired terminal, on Dorian sitting across a table from Nolan Say with nothing between them but 11 years of professional proximity and one man's absolute certainty that he'd already won. Don't think about Dorian. Think about the terminal. Think about the code. The shaft angled downward. She felt it before she saw it. The gradient shift under her palms, the change in air pressure. The security hub was below and ahead, and she could hear, very faintly, the electronic hum of the hardwired monitors. She found the access panel by feel, ran her fingers along the seam, and pushed. It opened into the hub. She dropped through, landed on both feet, and was at the console before Roman cleared the shaft. The monitors were still live. She scanned them in one sweep. East Library, empty now. Main foyer, 2 captains she didn't recognize in a tense standoff posture near the front doors. The wine cellar access. One figure down, sitting against the wall with his head in his hands, which was bad, and she filed it. The council chamber. Dorian was in the council chamber. He was standing. Nolan was sitting. They were talking. She could see the movement of mouths, the specific body language of a negotiation where both parties knew the other was buying time and were doing it anyway. Dorian's hands were at his sides, not on his weapon. Nolan's right hand was on the table, not in his lap. She noted that. Right hand visible, left hand not. Terminal, Roman said behind her. She was already at the keyboard. The hardwired system was isolated from the main network. Intentionally, a security redundancy that was now the only thing keeping her connected to anything functional. She pulled up the archive interface. Her own system, her own architecture, the filing structure she'd built over 3 months of work in a Portland apartment with blackout curtains and a secondhand paper shredder. She knew it the way she knew her own handwriting. The code was embedded in a subdirectory she'd labeled with a date that meant nothing to anyone except her, the date she'd left Chicago, the date she'd been trying to stop thinking about for 8 years. She found it in 40 seconds, pulled it, copied it to the blank drive. Then she stopped, looked at the blank drive in her hand, looked at the archive drive still in her jacket, thought about what Nolan expected to see, what he'd been told to expect, what a man who had planned for 3 years and was now sitting in a glass room waiting for the endgame would be watching for. He'd be watching for Dorian bringing the drive. Or Mara. One of the Vanes, either one, walking to that room and handing over what he needed. He'd built the entire final sequence around that image. The exchange, the code, the detonation system neutralized. And then the clean removal of everyone who could testify to what he'd done. He was expecting a handoff. She looked at Roman. He was watching the council chamber monitor, his jaw set, his hands at his sides. She could see him running the same calculus she was, the same sequence of if, then, the same branching tree of outcomes. He'd been doing this longer than she had, and in higher stakes environments, but the math was the same math. He's going to check whatever we give him, she said. Before he enters any code or releases any lock, he's going to verify the drive. Yes. So the switch only works if I'm there to run it. She held up the blank drive. A blank drive with a convincing directory structure buys maybe 90 seconds before he realizes it's empty. I need to be in that room to use those 90 seconds. Roman looked at her. No. Roman. You go into that room, you're behind reinforced glass with one exit and a man who has been planning this for 3 years. His voice was controlled, and she could hear exactly what was underneath the control, and it made her chest do something complicated. The moment he has you and the drive in the same space, he doesn't need to negotiate anymore. He doesn't know I have the real code already extracted. He'll assume I need access to the archive to retrieve the code, that I can't just hand him a string of numbers. He built the game around the drive, not the information inside it. She was thinking out loud now, assembling it as she spoke. The recursive program. He doesn't know I can run it from extracted code rather than from the drive itself. He thinks the drive is the mechanism. Roman was very still. I need a terminal in that room, she said. The council chamber has a built-in system. I've seen it. Roman, I've been in that room. There's a console built into the table, standard for the chamber's function. If I can access it from inside, the chamber system is on the main network, which is locked, which Nolan has access to, which means if he opens the chamber system to verify the drive, I can run the program from his own access point. She watched Roman's face. He hands me the rope by taking the bait. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. 4. He'll have a weapon on you the entire time, Roman said. Yes. If he realizes what you're doing before the program finishes running. I know. Mara. He said her name the way he'd said it on the recording, without the armor, without the careful management of what he allowed to show. I am not willing to... You don't get to decide that, she said, quiet, direct. That's what we talked about in the library. That's what Dorian and I talked about in the library. I'm going into that room. I need you to find a way into the chamber through the service panel you used when you said you knew the ventilation shaft route. He looked at her for a long moment. The monitors hummed. Somewhere in the building, the automated clock that Nolan's voice had mentioned was counting toward the point where the code stopped mattering and the autonomous sequence took over. The chamber has a concealed service access behind the east wall panel, Roman said. It was built for the original owner. It opens from the outside but not from the inside. If I reach it, I can enter the room. But Nolan knows the chamber. He may have accounted for it. Then we find out. She pocketed the blank drive in her jacket's outer pocket. Accessible. She put the real code, the extracted string, 12 characters, copied to a scrap of paper from the console desk, inside her shoe, under her foot. Give me 4 minutes to get to the chamber, then come through the panel. If he hears me, then come through anyway, fast. She looked at the monitor one more time. Dorian was still standing, still talking. His posture had shifted slightly. She could read Dorian's body the way she could read a balance sheet, the micro-adjustments that nobody else noticed. He was running out of material. Whatever he'd been using to hold Nolan's attention was thinning. I need to go now. She went. The route to the council chamber from the security hub ran through the central gallery, open space, high ceiling, the kind of room that made a person feel visible from every direction at once. She moved through it fast and low and didn't look up at the gallery windows because looking up was a liability and she needed her eyes ahead. The crimson light was thinner here, the fixtures spaced further apart, and there were stretches of near total dark that she navigated by memory and by the feel of the floor changing from marble to hardwood to the inlaid stone of the chamber antechamber. The chamber doors were closed. She stopped outside them. Put her hand against the wood. Felt nothing. No vibration. No sound loud enough to penetrate. She looked at the door handle, the gap at the bottom, the hinges. Everything standard, everything as she remembered. She took one breath that she made herself take slowly, made herself fill completely, and then she opened the door and walked in. The council chamber was a circle. That was the thing she'd forgotten, or hadn't forgotten but hadn't let herself sit with. The specific geometry of it, the way the reinforced glass walls created an enclosed ring within the outer structure, a room within a room, so that standing inside it you could see in 3 directions into adjacent spaces, but the glass created a sealed environment, temperature-controlled, soundproofed. The table was long and dark, and the console panel was built into the near end, exactly as she'd remembered. At the far end sat Nolan Say, and standing between them, still on his feet, still with his hands at his sides, Dorian, who turned when the door opened and whose expression went through 6 things in under a second and settled on something she recognized as relief, so intense it almost broke his composure entirely. Nolan looked at her. He was a composed man. She'd known that from the monitors, from the way he'd been sitting, from everything Roman had told her about his operational style. Polished was the word Roman used. Not flashy, not theatrical, polished like a surface that had been worked on until nothing caught on it. He was in his mid-50s, well-kept, with the kind of stillness that came from being the most dangerous person in whatever room he occupied for long enough that his body had stopped performing danger and simply was it. His left hand was in his lap. "Miss Vane," he said, "I was expecting your brother." "I know." She let the door close behind her. Didn't move toward the table yet. "I'm the one with the drive." Nolan looked at Dorian. "You should have led with that." "She makes her own decisions," Dorian said flat. "Apparently." Nolan's attention came back to her, and it was the specific attention of a man taking inventory. She let him look. She kept her hands visible and her face neutral and stood with her weight even on both feet, and thought about the piece of paper under her right foot and the blank drive in her outer pocket and the 4 minutes she'd asked Roman for that were now approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds. "The drive," Nolan said. "The detonation system first," she said. "I want confirmation the override is real, that inputting the code actually disarms the circuit. You'll have to trust me. I've read your financial records for 3 months. I don't trust you." She moved to the table. Not to the far end, not toward him, to the near end, to the console panel. She put her hand on the surface next to it. "The chamber system. Open it and I'll verify the drive architecture. That's how this works. You see what you need to see, I see what I need to see, and we complete the exchange. Nolan tilted his head. Half a degree. The inventory looked sharpened. You want me to open the chamber's network access, so I can verify the code location on a live interface? Yes. She kept her voice even, kept her hand still, kept her eyes on his face, and not on his left hand, which was still in his lap, and which she needed to know the contents of. You've spent 3 years building this. You want the drive. I want proof the override is functional. That's a reasonable exchange of information before the handoff. A pause. She counted it. 3 seconds. 4. Fair, Nolan said. He reached under the table with his left hand, and his left hand came up with a key card and a weapon, and he set the weapon on the table in front of him where she could see it clearly. A statement, not a threat, the specific display of a man who wants you to understand the parameters. And he used the key card on a reader built into the far end of the console. The chamber system activated. Screens lit along the table surface, the network interface coming live, and she could see from the near end the file architecture, the access menus, the directory structure of the main system, Nolan's access point, Nolan's credentials, the entire chamber system open on his authority. She reached into her outer pocket and produced the blank drive, set it on the table and slid it toward him. Not all the way, halfway, a midpoint. He looked at it, looked at her, reached for it. Dorian, she said without looking at her brother. Step away from the table. Dorian moved. She heard him move, 2 steps back to the left, which put him out of the direct sight line between herself and Nolan. And she felt Nolan register that movement without looking at it, and she felt him decide it was positioning rather than threat, because Dorian's hands were still empty and visible, and that calculation, that small, understandable, absolutely fatal miscalculation, was what she had been building toward. She plugged her extracted code string into the chamber console, not the drive, not the archive. 12 characters typed fast on the console keyboard with her left hand, while her right hand stayed visible on the tabletop, and the system recognized the code because it was the correct code. It was the real code. It was the key embedded in her archive that she had extracted 40 seconds ago in the security hub and carried in her shoe to this room and transferred to her memory in the corridor outside because she had been a forensic accountant for 8 years. And the thing about numbers was that she did not forget them. The system opened. She navigated to the program she'd built in Portland, the one Nolan had been told was inside the drive, the recursive lock and transmit, and she ran it from the chamber's own terminal on Nolan's own credentials. And the thing about running a program from inside a credentialed session was that it ran with the permissions of the person logged in, which meant that when the recursive lock hit every account Nolan controlled, it hit them with administrator access. And when it began transmitting to external servers, the financial crimes unit contact she'd preloaded, every captain in the organization's communication network, the encrypted channel she'd built as a dead drop 3 months ago for exactly this contingency. It transmitted cleanly, completely, with Nolan Say's own digital fingerprints on every file. 6 seconds. 7. Nolan picked up the blank drive. He looked at it. He looked at her. The polished surface cracked, just slightly, just enough. She watched it happen. The specific, catastrophic moment when a man who has controlled every variable for 3 years encounters the variable he didn't account for, and she held his gaze and did not look away, and did not move, and let him work through it, let him trace it backward from the blank drive in his hand to the terminal screen, to the program running on his own access point with his own credentials stamping every packet of data that was currently departing the estate's hardwired satellite uplink for destinations he had no ability to intercept. He stopped. It's already gone, she said. 14 minutes of transmission, financial records, transaction trails, the complete conspiracy documentation, audio from your intercom sessions tonight. Your captains have it. The financial crimes unit has it. 4 independent servers have it. She kept her voice flat, kept it professional, kept it the voice of someone reading a balance sheet. The drive was never the mechanism, Nolan. The code was. And I already had the code. He stood up. The weapon came off the table. Dorian moved. She heard him move, and she kept her eyes on Nolan and heard Dorian's trajectory, and in her peripheral vision saw her brother step forward and heard Nolan's voice go from composed to something with edges in it, something that had been under the polish for 3 years and was now through the surface. Shut it down. He had the weapon level, directed at her, and his voice was even, but his left hand wasn't. His left hand was in the specific controlled tremble of a man managing his own adrenaline very badly. Shut down the transmission, now. I can't, she said. It's recursive. Interrupting it would require access I don't have and authority you've already spent. She looked at the weapon, looked at his face. Shooting me doesn't change what's already transmitted. Shooting me just adds to it. Mara, Dorian's voice. Controlled, careful, the voice he used when things were seconds from going wrong and he needed to slow them down. Nolan, think about the math. The evidence is out. Killing her doesn't buy you anything. It buys me a negotiating position, Nolan said. With who? Dorian said. Your captains are reading your financial records right now. Your accounts are frozen. The people you needed to be afraid of you are... The east wall panel opened. Roman Calder came through it. He came through fast and low, and the specific quality of his presence in the room changed the atmosphere in the way that a sudden drop in barometric pressure changes weather. Something in the body registered it before the mind caught up, some old signal. And Nolan swung the weapon and Roman was already not where it was pointing, already inside the geometry of the room in a way that shouldn't have been possible from a standing start through a narrow panel, and Dorian moved at the same instant from the left. The weapon discharged. The sound in an enclosed glass room was enormous, concussive, the kind of sound that stops thought. Mara dropped behind the console end of the table by reflex, pure animal reflex with no decision attached to it, and from the floor she heard Nolan's voice and Roman's voice, and one piece of furniture going over, and then a very specific silence that was different from the silence before the shot. She came up from behind the console. Roman had Nolan's weapon arm, had it controlled, wrist-locked, the weapon angled at the ceiling, and he had Nolan's body torqued in the specific leverage position of someone who had been put there by a person who knew how to put people there efficiently. Nolan was breathing hard. Roman was not. Dorian was standing 6 feet away with his hand pressed flat against his left side. Dorian. She was around the table before she'd decided to move. He turned when she said his name and she saw his face, saw the controlled expression that meant he was managing pain, and she pulled his hand away from his side and looked. The shot had grazed him. She could see it, a line of torn fabric and blood along his left flank, above the hip. Not deep, not arterial. The kind of wound that was serious in the way that all wounds were serious and not fatal in the way that she needed it not to be. She pressed his hand back against it. Her hands were shaking and she made them stop. I'm fine, he said. You're not fine, you're shot. Grazed. He looked down at her hands. Mara, I'm okay. She believed him. She held the belief carefully, the way you hold something that hasn't been verified but is too important to question right now. She looked up at his face, and he looked back at her, and they were standing in the same room they'd been in 8 years ago in the architecture of things, the same impossible configuration, the same cost being paid by the wrong person, and something in her chest cracked open with a clean, quiet fracture that she'd been holding against for 8 years. I'm sorry, she said, quietly. To him, not the room. He looked at her for a moment. Then he put his free hand on top of hers, the one pressing against his side, and said, I know, me too. Roman hadn't moved. He held Nolan in the leverage position with the efficiency of someone who had decided not to change variables until the situation required it, and Nolan was no longer struggling. The moment his weapon arm had been controlled, the specific quality of his resistance had changed, shifted from action to assessment. He was still thinking. She could see it on his face. That made him more dangerous, not less. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her. And in his face, beneath the cracked polish, beneath the 3-year plan collapsing in real time, she saw the thing she hadn't expected to see. Not rage, not calculation, but something older and more basic. The look of a man who is looking at his own reflection in someone else's competence and finding it intolerably bright. The transmission is complete, she said. It's done, Nolan. Whatever you do in this room doesn't change it. Then what does it change, he said, if I still have the detonator? She looked at his left hand. In the struggle, it had opened, empty. You don't, she said. He looked at his own hand. She looked at Roman. Roman looked at Nolan, and then, with the specific deliberateness of a man who has arrived at a decision that will cost him something he has already decided to spend, he said, "It's over." "Nothing is over," Nolan said. His voice had dropped to something she hadn't heard from him before, quieter, stripped of the operational surface, arriving from somewhere underneath the construction. "You think the evidence ends this? You think exposing me collapses the network? I spent 11 years building relationships in this organization, Roman. I know where every body is buried, literally. And if I go down, then you go down," Roman said. "And what you know goes into testimony, and the network collapses from the inside out instead of the outside in." He adjusted the leverage hold slightly, and Nolan's breath shortened with it. "I spent 30 years building this empire. I know what it costs to dismantle it. That calculation has already been made." Nolan looked at him. The look was pure. No strategy in it. Just the naked disbelief of a man who has bet everything on his opponent being unwilling to blow up the board. "You won't," Nolan said. "I already have," Roman said. And in the console screen on the table behind her, still running on Nolan's own credentials, Mara could see the transmission log scrolling, packet after packet, destination after destination, the complete architecture of Nolan Say's 3-year conspiracy delivered in real time to every person and institution positioned to act on it. And beneath her right foot, the original piece of paper with the 12-character code was pressed flat against the insole of her stockinged foot, the key to the detonation system that had threatened to end everyone in this building, intact and unspent and still in her possession. She bent down, pulled the paper out, set it on the console's surface. Then she looked at Nolan and said, "Deactivate the circuit." He looked at the paper, looked at her, looked at Roman, who had not moved, who was still holding him with the certainty of someone who has accepted all possible costs and found them payable. Something in Nolan Say went very still. Not the operational stillness, the stillness that comes after, the stillness of a man arriving at the end of something he built and finding that the last room contains nothing he didn't already know. His right hand moved to his jacket. Roman let it, controlled it, but let it. Nolan reached inside and produced a second keycard, older than the chamber card, worn at the edges from being carried for a long time, and set it on the table. "Foundation panel," he said. "Basement access. The override reader is on the south wall." Mara picked up the card. She picked up the paper with the code. She looked at Dorian, still standing with his hand at his side, still on his feet, which was the most important thing. She looked at Roman, who was looking at her with the specific expression she had been trying not to look at directly for the last 3 hours because it required a response. She wasn't ready to give in a glass room with blood on the floor and everything still unresolved. The autonomous sequence timer was still running somewhere in the walls. She had the card. She had the code. She had the route to the basement panel that Silas had given them without knowing what he was giving. And she had the 7 or 8 minutes that might still be left before the sequence went autonomous and the code stopped mattering. She moved. Behind her, she heard Roman say, to Nolan, 2 words only, quiet, final, the voice of someone closing an account. And then she heard Dorian's footsteps fall in behind her, uneven but present, and she pushed through the council chamber door into the main gallery and ran, the code paper folded in her fist and the keycard hard against her palm and the cold stone floor under her feet. And somewhere ahead of her, the basement stairs and the south wall panel and the last lock on a night that had started with a leather satchel and $12 million and a man behind a desk who had looked at her like a problem he found interesting. She ran toward the last door, and the clock in the walls kept counting, indifferent and absolute, the way all clocks do, without malice, without mercy, without any interest in whether the person running toward the deadline had anything left to run on, because time never cared about the distance between where you were and where you needed to be, only about whether you closed it in time or didn't. And Mara Vane, who had spent 8 years building a life at a careful distance from everything that could unmake her, was running at full speed toward the thing that could end everyone she had left, with a piece of paper in her hand and nothing between her and the next 30 seconds except the ground under her feet and the absolute refusal to be the version of herself that stopped before the door. The basement stairs were concrete and unlit, and she took them 4 at a time with her hand on the wall and the keycard digging into her palm, and Dorian's uneven footsteps behind her, telling her he was still moving, still upright, still present, which was all she needed to know. The foundation level smelled like cold stone and old water, and the particular underground smell of a building that had been standing for 70 years. Not rot, not decay, just age. The accumulated weight of time pressing down through concrete. The crimson emergency lighting didn't reach this far. There was one hardwired fixture at the base of the stairs, a pale industrial bulb that gave everything the quality of an old photograph. Flattened, gray-edged, devoid of warmth. She stopped at the bottom and looked south. The passage ran the length of the estate, exactly as Silas had described, wide enough for 2 people abreast, lined with utility conduit and pipe bundles, the infrastructure of a large house exposed and functional. The south wall was visible from here, 40 feet away, and on it she could see the panel. Gray metal, recessed, a reader mounted beside it with a small LED indicator that was currently red. Red meant armed. Red meant the autonomous sequence was still live. She ran. Behind her she heard Dorian say something, half a word, a warning that didn't finish. And then she heard what he'd heard, a sound from the far end of the passage, from the east where the utility tunnels branched toward the armory access. Footsteps. More than one person, moving fast. She didn't stop. The panel was 20 feet ahead and the footsteps were further than that, and the math was simple even if nothing else tonight had been. She hit the panel at a controlled run, caught herself with both hands on the wall, and looked at the reader. Standard card interface, a single slot, the LED above it cycling between red and a slow amber pulse that she didn't know the meaning of and didn't have time to analyze. She pressed the key card against the reader. The LED went green. The panel opened. Not automatically. She had to pull it, and it was heavier than she expected, solid steel behind a thin facade, the kind of construction that meant this panel had been designed as a final barrier. Inside was a touchpad, a 12-character input field, the cursor blinking in the first position. Her hands were shaking. She made them stop, made herself look at the pad and nowhere else. The 12 characters were in her memory, and they were in the paper still folded in her fist. And she didn't need the paper, but she unfolded it anyway because her hands needed something to do, and she read the string once and typed it without looking at her fingers because she'd been typing numbers, without looking at her fingers since she was 19 years old, and some things went down to the bone. She pressed confirm. Nothing happened for 2 seconds. 2 seconds that were the longest of the night, longer than the corridor gas, longer than the ventilation shaft, longer than the moment Nolan's weapon had discharged and the sound had stopped thought entirely. 2 seconds of the cursor blinking and the LED holding green and the footsteps getting closer and Dorian's breathing audible 6 feet to her left. Then the LED went white. A deep mechanical sequence moved through the walls around her. She felt it more than heard it, a resonant unlocking, multiple points releasing simultaneously, the sound of a system that had been held under tension for hours, letting go all at once. Above her, through the concrete, she heard it propagate through the building. The steel shutters, the door locks, the sealed corridors releasing in sequence, a wave of mechanical motion spreading from the foundation outward and upward until the estate was, for the first time since midnight, open. The autonomous sequence was dead. She put her back against the south wall and slid down it until she was sitting on the concrete floor with the key card and the paper in her lap, and her knees pulled up and her head back against the cold stone. And she breathed. Just breathed. 3 full breaths that she allowed to shake on the exhale because there was nobody watching except Dorian, and Dorian had been watching her shake and recover since she was old enough to be scared of things. The footsteps from the east passage resolved into 2 of Roman's captains. The pair she'd seen on the monitor near the armory access, younger men, faces she didn't know, weapons drawn and then lowered when they saw who was in the passage. They stopped, looked at her, looked at the open panel with its white LED, looked at Dorian, who was standing with his hand at his side and blood showing dark through his fingers in the pale basement light. "Get him upstairs," she said. "He needs medical." Neither captain moved for a moment. She understood it. They didn't know her, didn't know what authority she carried, didn't know what the chain of command looked like in the aftermath of a night that had dissolved most of it. They were waiting for something recognizable. She looked at Dorian. He looked at the captains. "You heard her?" They moved. She stayed on the floor a moment longer. The building was open now. She could feel it the way you feel a room when a window is unlocked, a subtle shift in pressure, in possibility. Somewhere above her, doors were swinging on their hinges. Somewhere above her, Roman was in the council chamber with Nolan Saye and the remains of 3 years of careful destruction, and she needed to get up and go back to that room. She got up, put the key card in her jacket pocket, put the folded paper next to it, went upstairs. The main foyer was transformed by the absence of lockdown, the same crimson emergency lighting, the same sealed windows. But the front doors were open, and the November air was coming through them, and outside she could see the distant motion of headlights on Aldrich Lane and hear what she'd been waiting to hear all night: sirens. Multiple sources, converging. The transmitted evidence had reached someone who could move on it, and the movement had been fast, which meant the Financial Crimes Unit had been watching this situation longer than she'd known. That was a conversation for later. Celeste Marr was in the main foyer. She was standing near the front doors with her coat on and her hands clasped in front of her, and the expression of someone who has survived something by staying very still and is not yet certain the surviving is complete. She looked at Mara when she came up the basement stairs, and what Mara saw in her face was not guilt, not relief, not the specific performance of innocence, just the exhausted, naked look of a person who has been scared for a very long time. "The shell companies," Mara said. Not an accusation, a question. "He told me they were for tax optimization," Celeste said. Her voice was steady, which was harder to do than it looked. "He brought me the legal structures 3 years ago, said Roman had approved them, said they were for insulating the legitimate business holdings." She paused. "I should have verified directly with Roman." "Yes," Mara said. "I know." Another pause. "He had things on me. Not criminal. Personal. Things I didn't want Roman to know." She looked at the open front doors. That was the leverage, my compliance for his silence. Mara looked at her. Thought about what 3 years of that felt like. Thought about the 8 years she'd carried her own version of something she didn't want examined, and how much of a person's energy went into the maintenance of things held in the wrong configuration. "You'll need to give a full account to Roman and to whoever walks through that door in the next 10 minutes. "I know that too. It'll be better than the alternative." "I know," Celeste said, and she sounded like she meant it, which was the most Mara could ask for tonight. She left Celeste in the foyer and went to find Roman. He was in the corridor outside the council chamber with Nolan Say in front of him, and 2 captains. The pair from the foyer, she recognized them now, flanking Nolan on either side. Nolan's hands were secured behind him with the wire Roman had pulled from the maintenance duct, which she registered as competent improvisation and also as very Roman, the kind of practical solution that came from treating every environment as a resource. His face was composed again. The crack in the polish had closed over. Not repaired, she could see the seam of it, but closed. He had returned to the performance of himself. She looked at Roman. Roman was looking at Nolan with the expression she'd seen from him twice before tonight. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the specific assessment of a man who has completed a task and is noting the result before moving to the next one. He turned when she came down the corridor, and his eyes moved over her in one fast inventory. Feet, hands, face, and something in him settled when he found what he was checking for. "The circuit," he said. "Down." He nodded once, looked at the captains. "Take him to the front entry. When law enforcement arrives, and they're arriving, you present him and the documentation that Mara transmitted. You do not speak beyond that. You wait for me." He looked at Nolan. "You'll cooperate." "I'll do what serves me," Nolan said. "That's the same thing, tonight." Roman's voice carried no heat. "The evidence is complete. Your accounts are frozen. Your network is reading your own transaction records right now and making decisions about where their loyalty sits when the money stops moving. Cooperation is the only currency you have left." Nolan looked at him. The thing that had shown through the crack earlier, that older, rawer thing, showed again for just a moment. "You won't dismantle it," he said. "The organization. You said you would. You won't." "Watch me," Roman said. It wasn't a threat. It was quieter than a threat. It was the specific statement of a man who has already made a decision in private and is simply informing another person of the world they're now living in. Nolan heard it. She saw him hear it, saw the understanding land that this was not a negotiating position, not a performance for the captains, not the kind of statement powerful men made and then walked back when the morning came. He heard the permanence in it. He looked at Mara. Just once, briefly, the look of someone calculating what part she'd played in this outcome. Then he let the captains move him down the corridor toward the foyer, and she watched him go, and she thought about 3 years of patience and careful construction and the specific tragedy of intelligence entirely misdirected. The same skills that had built his conspiracy could have built something that lasted, something that didn't require anyone else's destruction as a foundation. She didn't feel sorry for him. She felt the waste of it, which was different. Roman came to stand beside her. They stood in the corridor and listened to the sirens getting closer and the estate settling into the post-lockdown quiet, the specific quality of a space that has been under enormous pressure and is now releasing it incrementally, like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. "Dorian," she said, "Captain Reyes took him to the East Salon. There's a medical kit there. Reyes has field training." A beat. "He'll need a hospital." "I know. I'll take him." Roman looked at her sideways. "You're leaving." "He needs a hospital, Roman." "Yes." He wasn't arguing. He was noting the way he noted things, filing them against some internal architecture of the situation. "I need to be here for the next several hours. Law enforcement, the captains, the process of whatever this becomes after tonight." He paused. "It will be considerable." "I know what it will be. I'm not asking you to stay for it." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the council chamber door, still open, the screens inside still glowing with the transmission log, and his profile in the residual crimson light was the same profile she'd been looking at in her peripheral vision all night, unchanged in its essential architecture, only the weight of the evening visible in the set of his jaw, the slight fatigue around his eyes that he wouldn't acknowledge and wouldn't allow to show in front of anyone who needed him to be certain. "Roman," he looked at her, "what you said in the security hub, that you weren't willing to—" She stopped, let herself choose the words properly rather than reaching for the first available ones. "I need you to understand something. The reason I went into that room wasn't because I didn't have a choice. It was because it was the right move, and I was the right person to make it." She held his gaze. "I'm not something that needs protecting from its own decisions. I haven't been for a long time. And if this—" She gestured, a small motion that encompassed the corridor and the chamber and the night and the 8 years and everything interior to them. "If any version of this is going to be different from what it was before, it starts with that." Roman was quiet for a moment. He didn't look away. He didn't give her the reassurance-shaped response, the quick agreement that would have been easier and cheaper and entirely unconvincing. He thought about what she'd said, which was what she'd wanted from him. Actual consideration, not performance. "I knew you could do it," he said. "Knowing you can and being willing to stand on the outside of the glass and watch it happen are different things." "I know they are. I'm not certain I'm good at the second one. I know that too." She looked at the floor. "It's not a disqualification, Roman. It's something to work on." She looked back up. "If you're willing to work on it." The sirens were at the gate now. She could hear Brecht's voice. Distant, calm, managing the arrival the way he managed everything, with the economy of a man who had decided what mattered and spent his effort only there. Roman reached into his jacket. She expected the study key, the master key he'd been carrying, the one she'd been thinking about intermittently all night as a symbol of something she hadn't yet decided how to receive. Instead, he reached past it and produced something smaller. The key from his jacket pocket, the manual one, the flat, old-fashioned key he'd used to lock the study from the inside at the beginning of all of this. He held it out. "The study lock," he said, "the secondary one. It's the only manual lock in the building that's entirely off the automated system. Nothing can seal it or unseal it remotely. It only works by hand." He paused. "I had it installed 3 years ago, after Dorian told me you weren't coming back." She looked at the key, looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Because I wanted one room in this building that I could control entirely." He held her gaze. One room that couldn't be taken from me by a system I didn't own. Another pause, shorter. I told myself it was security protocol. She took the key, turned it over in her fingers the way she'd turned over the master key earlier tonight. It was smaller than she expected, lighter, the kind of thing that looked insignificant until you understood what it fit. She pocketed it. "I'll be back," she said. "After the hospital. After Dorian's settled. After I've slept for approximately 12 hours. I'll be here. Roman." She looked at him one more time, this last time in the crimson-lit corridor, with the evidence transmission completed, and the detonation system dead, and the sirens at the gate, and every door in the building standing open. "Open the front shutters before I leave. I want to see the outside." He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved to the wall panel. A manual override, a hand crank, the backup the automated system couldn't reach, and he turned it. She heard the shutters moving, the steel panels retracting from the windows in sequence, and the first gray light came through the glass. Not sunrise yet, not quite, but the particular luminosity of 4 in the morning in November when the sky is beginning its long argument with the dark. She watched the light fill the corridor. Real light. City light, ambient and impure, and exactly what she needed to see. Then she went to find her brother. Dorian was in the east salon on a settee that was too short for him, jacket off, shirt cut open at the side where Captain Reyes, a solid woman of about 40 with practical hands and the specific calm of someone who had dealt with worse, had cleaned the wound and was laying a field bandage across his ribs. The graze was exactly as it had looked in the council chamber, significant enough to need a hospital, not significant enough to be the end of anything. Dorian had the expression of a man tolerating medical attention under protest, which was his default expression for medical attention. He looked up when she came in. She sat down on the edge of the settee and looked at the bandage and at his face and at the way he was holding himself, slightly forward, compensating for the left side, and said nothing for a moment because there was a great deal to say, and the ordering of it mattered. "You knew I was running a program," he said. Not accusing, just noting. "Yes. You could have told me. If Nolan read your face before I was done, I have a good face. You have a terrible face, Dorian. You always have." She said it without softness, the way you say truths to people you've known since childhood. Directly, because the familiarity makes softening it into something smaller than what it is, a kind of disrespect. He almost smiled, which was the right response. "The recording." He sobered. She looked at her hands in her lap. "I should have told you about the conversation, about what he asked." She thought about how to frame it and decided framing was another way of managing what a person received, and she was done managing. "I was ashamed of how much I wanted to say yes. I thought if I told you what had happened, you'd see it, that I'd wanted to stay, and you'd understand that my leaving was harder than I'd made it look, and I didn't want you to carry that. I thought protecting you from the weight of my choice was an act of consideration." Dorian looked at the far wall. Reyes finished the bandage, quietly gathered her kit, and left the room with the discretion of someone who knew when the medical work was done and the other kind was beginning. "I've been protecting you from things since you were 4 years old," Dorian said. His voice was different from how it had been in the library. The fury had burned out, and what was underneath was older and softer and more genuinely painful. "And you've been protecting me from things since you were old enough to decide you could. We've been very busy protecting each other." He turned and looked at her. "At considerable personal cost." "Yes. It would have been okay," he said, "if you'd told me. I would have been angry. I would have made it difficult for a while." He paused. "But I would have found a way through it. You didn't give me the chance to find the way through it." "I know. You don't get to decide what I can handle, Mara." "I know, Dorian." "Say it back." She looked at him. "I don't get to decide what you can handle." He held her gaze for a moment, long enough to verify that she meant it rather than saying it to close the conversation. And then he exhaled, a long, slow exhale that carried with it some portion of something he'd been holding for 8 years. Not all of it, not the whole weight, but enough to change the load. "You're going back to him." Not a question. Not tonight. Tonight I'm taking you to a hospital. She met his eyes. After that, yes. I'm staying in Chicago. Because of Roman. Because of me. She held the distinction carefully. Because I've been running from a decision I already made and calling the running responsible. Because there is work here I can do that matters. Real work, not just keeping myself occupied at a safe distance from everything that cost me something. She paused. And yes, also because of Roman. Both things can be true. Dorian thought about that. Captain Reyes came back to the doorway and said, quietly, that there were 2 vehicles outside, law enforcement at the front, and a second car, unmarked, that had arrived from the direction of the city and was asking for Mara Vane by name. Her financial crimes unit contact, moving faster than she'd expected. She stood. Can you walk to a car? I walked through a gas corridor and a ventilation shaft tonight, Dorian said. I can walk to a car. The gas corridor was me. You were behind me. Moral support is still participation. He reached out and she took his hand and helped him up, and he was heavier than she remembered the way he was bigger than she remembered. The accumulated weight of the years she'd missed, and she steadied him without commenting on the steadying, and they walked together out of the East Salon, down the hall, toward the front foyer where the gray pre-dawn light was coming through the open windows, and the front doors stood wide. Roman was in the foyer. He was speaking with 2 law enforcement officers in civilian clothes, federal, by the look of them, the specific bureaucratic composure of people who operated in the institutional aftermath of events like this. He looked up when Mara and Dorian came through, and she saw him assess Dorian's condition, the bandage under the cut shirt, the careful way Dorian was distributing his weight, and she saw him decide not to say anything that would make Dorian feel assessed. She appreciated that. One of the federal officers looked at her. Ms. Vane, we need to speak with you. You'll have everything in the transmission, she said. 3 months of documentation. It's complete. She kept moving toward the front doors. I'm taking my brother to a hospital. I'll be available at whatever contact you have in the next few hours. The officer, young, competent-looking, with the expression of someone deciding whether to make this a conversation about authority, looked at her, and then at Roman, and then, briefly, at the physical scale of the estate around him, the open doors and the retreated shutters, and the residual evidence of a night that had moved faster than any bureaucratic process could track. He decided not to make it a conversation about authority. We'll be in contact, he said. Good, she said. She and Dorian reached the front steps. Outside, the city was still dark, but less so. That liminal hour when the dark has peaked and begun its retreat, not yet visible but felt, a change in the quality of the air. She could smell the cold and something beneath it, the particular smell of November in Chicago that she had tried to forget and apparently failed at entirely because it hit her in the chest the way smells hit, below the level of decision, straight into something she didn't have a name for except home, which was a word she had been avoiding for 8 years and was done avoiding. Roman came to the top of the steps. She turned, looked up at him. He was 2 steps above her, and she let the height differential stand, didn't step up, just looked at him in the gray pre-dawn light where he had no crimson wash to flatten him and no emergency lighting to remove the color from things, just the pale, genuine light of 4 in the morning and the truth of a face she had been carrying in her memory for 8 years and finding consistently that the memory was accurate. The master key, she said. In your desk. Is it still there? He looked at her, reading the question's architecture. Yes. Leave it there. She held his gaze. I don't want the master key, Roman. I want the front door. She gestured at the open entrance behind him. That door. I want it to be open when I come back. Not because you unlocked it for me, because that's just how it is. Because doors in a house where someone is welcome don't need a key. She paused. Can you do that? He was quiet for a moment. She watched him sit with it, not performing consideration, actually sitting with it, the way he did with things that required him to put down something he'd been carrying in a way he thought was correct and pick it up differently. Yes, he said. She held his gaze one more moment. Then she turned and took the steps down and walked with Dorian toward the waiting car, and she did not look back, not because she was performing departure, but because she had looked at what she needed to look at, and there was nothing left in that direction that required her eyes. Dorian got into the car with Captain Reyes's help. Mara got in after him. The driver, one of the federal team's civilian, quiet, started the engine and pulled out onto Aldrich Lane, and through the window she watched the Calder estate recede, watched the open front doors and the retreated shutters and the light coming through the uncovered windows, and she thought about how different a building looked when it wasn't sealed against itself. In the car, Dorian sat with his head back against the seat, and his eyes closed and his hand loose in his lap, and after a while he said, without opening his eyes, "I'm glad you came back." She looked at him. "Not tonight," he said. "Well, tonight too, but back. To Chicago. I'm glad." She looked at the city moving past the window. Chicago at 4 in the morning, the last hour of the night, the streets mostly empty and the buildings lit from inside, and the lake somewhere to the east showing its presence in the quality of the air even when it wasn't visible. The city she'd grown up in and run from and thought about every day of the 8 years she'd spent not being in it. "Me too," she said. She meant it, both the gratitude and the complication of it, both the cost already paid and the cost still ahead, the work of rebuilding what the night had fractured, the legal processes Nolan's prosecution would require, the dismantling of the organization that would take months and generate consequences she couldn't fully predict, and underneath all of it, the slower, less dramatic work of two people deciding what they were to each other, now that all the old reasons for not deciding had been burned away. She was staying. She had made the decision somewhere in the basement passage between the code and the override panel, or maybe she'd made it when she bought the cash ticket in Portland, or maybe she'd made it the night she'd found the shell company address and known immediately that the only move was the one that required her to come back. It didn't matter when. What mattered was that the decision had a shape now, and the shape was permanent, and she wasn't going to be running from it anymore. The hospital was 20 minutes away through the empty city. Dorian fell into something near sleep, his breathing slowing, the tension releasing from his face in degrees until what was left was the face she'd known before the years had layered things over it. Recognizable, unguarded, the face of someone who was, underneath everything, still her brother. She watched the city until the hospital appeared at the end of a long straight road, its lights constant and indifferent and useful, the way hospitals always were, present without judgment, equipped for the aftermath of things, ready to receive whatever the night had produced. The car slowed. She reached over and put her hand on Dorian's arm, and he woke with the practiced alertness of a man who had been sleeping lightly for 11 years in an organization that could require you to be present at any moment. "We're here," she said. He looked at the hospital, looked at her, looked at the sky above the building, where the first perceptible change in the darkness was beginning. Not light yet, not color, just the very earliest suggestion of the dark becoming something else. The threshold before the threshold. "Mara," he said. "What?" He looked at her, and in his face was the whole weight of the night, and the 8 years before it, and the 20 years before that. Everything that had made them who they were to each other, the cost of it, and the irreplaceable substance of it. And he said simply, "Don't disappear again." She looked at him, at the face she had carried in her memory through 8 cities over 8 years, the face that showed up in the margin of everything she'd done and every decision she'd made, the way people you love show up at the edge of your vision even when you've decided they're not the direction you're facing. "I won't," she said. 2 words. She gave them the weight they required, not reassurance, not performance, but the specific gravity of a person who has understood what her absence cost and is not going to do that again, not because it was comfortable, but because the discomfort of staying was a different category of cost from the discomfort of leaving, and she had paid the second kind long enough to know she preferred the first. They got out of the car. The November air hit clean and cold, and she pulled her jacket closed and walked beside her brother through the hospital entrance into the bright institutional light, and behind them the door swung closed on the night and the estate and the sealed rooms and the game that had ended. Not the way it was designed to end, but the way it had to, with the players refusing the final rule, with the board still standing, with everyone who was supposed to lose walking out through doors that someone had decided to leave open. 6 months later, the building on Aldrich Lane had different curtains. That was the first thing she noticed when she pulled up for the second morning in a row. Not the construction crew in the East Wing, not the new signage on the gate, not the absence of the security kiosk where Brecht used to stand. The curtains. White, practical, the kind that let light through without effort. Roman had never had curtains. Roman had had steel shutters and a preference for controlled darkness and a study window that looked out over grounds he could survey. Now there were curtains. She sat in her car for a moment and looked at them. Then she got out and walked up the drive. No gate guard now, no kiosk, just a path between two new plantings. Nothing strategic, something merely alive. And she pushed the front door open because it was unlocked. Because it was always unlocked now, because that was how it was. And she walked into a building that smelled like fresh paint and coffee, and the ongoing work of becoming something different. Dorian was in what used to be the council chamber, now a conference room with normal lighting and a table that faced the window instead of the glass walls, reviewing security protocols for the new corporation's external partners with a woman from the legal team. He looked up when she passed the open door and lifted 2 fingers in acknowledgement. Their shorthand since childhood, the gesture that meant, I see you and I'm occupied and we'll talk later. And she returned it and kept moving. The forensic division was on the 2nd floor, in what had been a guest wing. 3 rooms knocked into one, good north light, filing systems that Mara had designed and installed, and was slowly populating with the cases that came through the new organization's mission. Financial crimes within criminal networks, asset recovery for families who had been systematically stolen from, the quiet and unglamorous work of following money into dark places and bringing it back into the light. She sat at her desk and opened the current case file and worked for 2 hours without interruption, and then she heard footsteps in the corridor and Roman appeared in the doorway. He looked at her desk, the organized stacks, the case materials, the coffee going cold at the edge, and then at her, and she looked back at him, and between them was the specific quality of 2 people in the same space who have decided to be there. Nolan's legal team is requesting a delay on the asset forfeiture, he said. They'll request 3 more delays after this one, she said. Standard procedure. The documentation holds. Tell whoever is handling it to be patient. You could handle it. I know. I have 2 other cases this week. She looked at him. Is that what you came up here for? He leaned against the doorframe. He was in shirt sleeves, collar open, cuffs rolled, the version of himself that existed in working hours rather than performance hours. And the November light from her north window was straightforward about his face, unfiltered, showing all the things that had settled into it since the night of the lockdown. The things you could only see in someone when the emergency had passed and the ordinary resumed and the face stopped managing itself. No, he said. Then what? He looked at her for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon. Inside the room, the filing systems held the first 3 months of work in an organization that had been built from the ruins of one that couldn't continue. 2 floors below, Dorian was reviewing security protocols. In the East Wing, crews were finishing the renovation of what had been the armory into what would be a records archive. I was going to ask if you wanted dinner, Roman said, but that seemed insufficient. It's not insufficient, she said. Dinner is appropriate. I also wanted to... He stopped. Reset. She watched him do it, watched him locate the right language without reaching for the performed version. I wanted to tell you that I read the case files from your first 3 months in Portland, the ones that preceded the Chicago work. You found 17 unreported financial discrepancies in 2 criminal networks and referred 11 of them to federal authorities. He paused. I didn't know you'd been doing that work. You didn't ask. No. He looked at the window. I assumed you had built a life that was about maintaining distance. I didn't consider that you might have built one that was about doing the same work from further away. Another pause, shorter. I should have considered it. She looked at him. Yes, you should have. I'm considering it now. I know, she said. I can tell. She stood up, picked up the cold coffee, looked at it, set it back down. Dinner. Yes, but I need another hour here first. I'll be downstairs. He pushed off the door frame and she listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor, and then the building went quiet around her. The specific quiet of late afternoon, work sounds at a low register, the building going about its new business with the particular ordinary industry of a place that has found its purpose and is not trying to be anything other than what it is. She sat back down, opened the case file, worked. The front door of the building on Aldrich Lane was unlocked. The curtains let the light through. In the East Wing, the archive was being built one file at a time, the record of a world being held accountable rather than held in the dark. And at a desk on the second floor, Mara Vane, forensic accountant, keeper of the real trail, the woman who had walked into a sealed building with evidence in a leather satchel and walked out with every door behind her standing open, sat in the November light and followed the money, the way she always had, into the places it tried not to be seen, and she brought it back, the way she always would, into the place where it could be counted and named and dealt with honestly. Outside, the city went on doing what cities do, imperfect and ongoing, full of dark money and bright windows, and all the impossible arithmetic of people trying to live decent lives inside systems that weren't built for decency, full of doors that needed opening. She had the keys, she knew how to use them.